Hey gang, welcome back to Joe Daddy's Garage. Today's video is part 9 in the Fangled Mustang fastback conversion build. As you know, I've started with this 68 Mustang Coupe that was in bad shape and rusted up and wrecked, and I salvaged some parts off of it, and I am fabricating a 68 fastback, mostly from dynacorn parts. In the previous video, I went through a lot of the steps of setting up the wheelhouses, getting them in the right location, and also indexing some things with the back frame rails. There was some issue with how they aligned based on my jig and also the fitment of the quarters. I think I have addressed most of that. Now what I'm trying to get accomplished in this video is I will be removing the quarter panel, the whole side of the car again, and welding the top of the outer wheelhouse, grinding that down, and then working towards getting the sides of the car back on. I need to get all that taken care of before I move to the front of the vehicle. Also, I have some details that you need to see and understand why I always say test fit, test fit, test fit. There's always something. As I mentioned previously, I strapped this down to my jig that I built so that I could raise the back up slightly and try to get it in more of the correct plane as needed. The other issues that I was running into was the drip rail not fitting against the inner structure of the body, and all, having just a conflict there. I think I've got that all figured out at this point, but I have something I wanted to show you with that in just a minute. Now in the back here, I have refitted the deck filler panel just as a temporary fit, and I'm coming off of the roof again at about maybe 6 inches or so inboard, and I am now just a hair under 33.5, and that is the same measurement that I have on this side. Sorry if I get the tape in the right position, and come up roughly a hair under 33.5. Now I mentioned before the window, the template that I made is at 32.5. The measurements I have from a friend of mine were showing 33.25 and 32.25, and as he pointed out, you want to be maybe a little bit on the bigger side than on the smaller side because the gasket is only going to fit so much. Now I'm very happy with how all this is fitting in the back. All lines up nice. The wheel arch is fitting like it's supposed to. Very happy with that. But I want to show you something with this rain gutter. Now this, again, I always test fit everything. You can see here the rain gutter is a little bit wide. And I don't know if they do this on purpose. I don't know why they want to make this a little wider. But I can modify that somewhat. But if you look, there's a crease that runs on the inside of this rain gutter right here. And that is meant to be like this line lines up with your edge of your A-pillar. So as I'm looking at this, you can press this over against the inner flange here, and you still have that opening for the trim, but it's tight. It's all the way against that, and you're not going to narrow that up much more based on how it's made. Up here on top, it is also quite wide. And part of that is the roof is wider right here. This flange, you can maybe tell, I don't know if I can show it definitively, but this is a wider portion, and as you go back, it actually gets narrower. So what I may end up doing is trimming the roof itself to allow the rain gutter to slide in a little further. If I do that, I can trim the inside of this edge, and I can widen this hole opening right here to help that. So not a big deal at this point. And back here, this hole right there is for the little metal tab that is on the stainless trim that holds the seal. So this right now, if you look at this is long, right? So this piece should be up higher, and if you also look at this, where that hole is, this should be up higher. So people have talked about these being too long, and in this case I would agree it needs to go up because it is hitting right now, or it needs to be shortened, and this hole needs to be, or this cutout needs to be moved up to align with that hole. And on this side, that hole lines up pretty close. Now this could go just a little higher to make it, you know, more visually appealing, but it really doesn't make much difference at this point. It also clears the top of the B-pillar right there. Now, keep in mind, if you do have to trim this, use the exterior final trim piece as a guide, because you don't want to cut off too much and have it like floating in free space. So just use that as a reference. On that side, I will definitely have to shorten it up as well. So I'm going to start pulling things back apart and see if I can get the welding done on this side that I already need to do on the outer wheelhouse, and maybe start welding in the complete body side as well. At this point, I have the wheelhouses welded in. So both inners are fully welded. The outers are welded to the inners. I think there's still a couple of welds down in that area on the inside that I have to complete. Not a big deal. I can do that at any time. So at this point, I have ground down the welds on the flange here. Don't really need to do that, but I look at it as it's added weight in a way, right? So if this car is going to be raced one day or whatever, every little bit adds on to the weight of the car. And it may be trivial, but if you look at racing, every ounce counts, right? And I have sprayed paint here and in this gap here, and of course this flange here, to help prevent corrosion. I've also done that back here and here. This is where I was talking about. I still have these 4 welds to do, not a big concern. And I've also done the paint, weld through primer, and paint here as well. Now, I've been looking at this and I'm trying to make sure I'm on the right page, and I feel like I'm doing it correctly. This flange right here, I talked about it earlier. The inner structure, I believe, has to mate against this surface, because if this flange is intended to do anything, I would think that it's meant to go around a sharp corner. So if you have this bent at a slight angle, as you can see, it's flared away from this flat surface. If you look at the side panel right here, this is the contact. So if you put that bent flange inside or forward on this flange, it's going to hit on the inside right here. And that means it's going to push this outward. And I don't think that's what they intended. You know, you can see how big that flange is. It's not a small piece, and it seems like an obvious thing to me. But you know, you just have to question some of this, because I've seen pictures where other people have done it, and it may not even be correct. They used maybe a different piece, a different inner structure, or maybe they cut this off so that this piece would go inside of that piece. But at this point, I think I'm going to leave this alone, and I feel like that the body piece needs to go up against this inside here. So I have also set this in place. It is not welded in. I just have that little my level holding it up, and I have holes prepped here for this to get welded on, so you can see that. And then on this upper surface right here, this is where the inner flange there this inner flange, will be held in place with this flange. So essentially, this piece came with this installed on that. And when I started fitting things together, there was a conflict. It wasn't letting stuff move. So I took this off. I drilled out all the spot welds, flattened them out, and this piece is marked with an L right there. And this one goes up here. So once this is in place, or once the body side is in place, I can slide this underneath, put it in, and weld it back to the body side. So you see this little raised, this little hump right here, that goes on top of this hump right here. So that kind of shows you where it needs to be. So I think that's going to be simple enough to do. Now what I want to do at this point is get both sides back up on the car, again refit things, and we'll talk about some stuff as I get it all back together. So I have pretty much everything in place. I didn't do a complete time lapse on this, putting it together, but that's okay. You kind of get the idea, I think. And I'm looking at all of the overlaps and the seams, and everything's looking really good at this point. The roof is fitting the way it should, but there is something I need to address up here, and I'll show you that in just a minute. I also dug out the deck lid and the quarter extensions, and those seem to fit pretty decent. You know, this is right now it's sticking back a little bit past the extension, but it's also not tight, or the gap is bigger than it needs to be up here at the top. So I just have tape holding this in place. There's no hinges or anything on it. And also I put 3 paint sticks here and 3 paint sticks here to support this so that it would kind of line up. Now I do see a little conflict in this location right there. So the deck lid, and I'm not completely done tuning all of this, but the deck lid is straight, or appears to be straight, and then the taper, it feels like there's a taper on the quarter and even on the extension. So I may have to do something right here on the deck lid later on, but it should be a fairly minor fix overall. You know, there's a lot of variables in these parts. The extension, or the tail panel, I have some screws behind this holding it in place, and it's lined up on the little notches like it's supposed to be, so pretty happy with that. And then the roof again overlaps nicely here, and I was doing some more test fitting of the rain gutters. I will do some adjusting on those. The roof will not be going on yet, and I have something else I want to show you up here in just a second. Now back here I put those flanged pieces, those brace supports, whatever you want to call them, that were attached to that inner structure, and I took them off as I said before. So now those are just sitting in place, and they fit, so I'll just adjust them as needed to weld them in. I also want to talk about that flange there. I kept looking at this and thinking, if I change that, if I put the support piece, the back seat support, if I try to put that in front of that flange, it changes the mount point down here at the bottom. It also changes the mating flange up here for the deck filler. So it would draw it all forward a little bit, and that won't work. So I'm pretty confident that it needs to stay behind that extension, or that piece right there. Now, one other thing here, this piece right here, this header panel, on these there is like a recessed area right here, and it's where this part of the roof, basically this is like a socket, or you know, it fits into that overlap. So it's got a little bit of a recess right here. What I'm running into is this part of the roof may just be a little bit long, because it's overlapping that portion where it's not supposed to. And I'm seeing it's either one side or the other, maybe a little bit of both. So what I may end up doing is just trimming back this portion of the trough, or whatever you want to call this channel, and so that you can't change it on this piece. You can cut this back though and make room for that little recessed area to fit in there. So that's one thing I have to address. Another thing I want to show you is how I take some crisscross measurements. So I measured an original car that I have, a 67, and basically I'm going to come off the top of that pinch weld and come up, see if I can do this with one hand, and I'm still adjusting a little bit, but this measurement is roughly 61 inches. So that gives you a dimension from that pinch weld up to this top pinch weld up here. So if I go to the other side and I replicate that measurement, basically we're right at the same measurement. This is like 61 and a 16th, and I can still tweak this just a little bit, and part of that is the problem with this channel, as I mentioned earlier. So I'll trim down these ends before I commit to welding in the header panel. I've also got to put in some holes so I can weld it. The rear, it seems to be fitting just fine. I don't have any issue with it. The overlap here at the top where the roof meets is really good, so no issue there. So I think I'm ready to start welding these sides on and continue with the project. So here is what I was talking about. This little notch right here, see how that's kind of raised up, or this is recessed? That's designed to go in the trough. This is where I marked it on one side, so it overlaps that much, which affects how deep it sits into that trough. So if you come up here and we do a quick measurement, we hook onto that, and this comes straight across. It's roughly 6 3/4, let's say, to this little corner right here. And if I go to the other side, it is quite a bit different. So I measure this one, same location. That one is 7 3/8. So 5/8 of an inch. So I need to cut this one off, shorten it up, and allow room for that piece to fit in there. You know, sometimes these things are just made in different dimensions. You know, maybe there was just a little bit of extra metal on the end of this piece whenever they stamped the thing out. I don't know. But I try to make sure everything is going to interact at least the way I feel that it should. You know, with this little extra material here, it would affect how that sits in that trough, and it may sit a little high and affect the overall fitment of the roof. So put the roof back on, and you know, you have to take your time doing this. You have to like lift it up and move it around to get it to drop into place, but it will fit. Now the thing is, you can't change the dimensions of the roof itself. It is the width that it is, and that's what you end up with. So you have to kind of work towards that. At this point, what I'm doing is I'm fitting in the support piece that goes underneath that side panel, and I'm just welding it in place. I'm using some short welds here just to get it started, and then I work my way through the various other welds to make sure this thing is going to be solid. As I pointed out before, this piece was attached to that side panel, but whenever I was fitting pieces together, it was actually fighting with the height of that side panel, so I had to make adjustments for that. That back section here, as I talked about before, I'm welding that solid to the seat structure, and it only makes sense to me, as I pointed out, with the curved piece or that extra metal on that flange, that it would fit that way. Now what I'm doing here is I'm welding in the header from the bottom side. I don't want it to move, and I know that if I do it now, it's going to be stationary. I don't have to worry about it when I take the roof panel back off. I do this on the front as well, I just didn't film it. Now here, I'm repeating the same thing on the driver's side wheelhouse, and I'll point out that sometimes I actually like to weld in weird angles like this, like I'm using my right hand and I'm holding the trigger or the gun upside down. Technically, in the way you look at it, in my hand it's upside down. And at times I feel like I make somewhat better welds doing this. I feel like I have to focus a little more and take my time to make sure I'm filling in these welds nicely. Same way here, I'm doing it again kind of upside down, inverted. And I also find that whenever I finish up this and I start welding with my left hand, it's the same situation. I almost feel like I take a little more time using my left hand to make sure the welds are filled in the way I want them. So I finished welding in this section. Just takes a few minutes to get all these in place. And then I moved on to the forward section of the B-pillars. As you can see, I'm using my crescent wrench hammer here to make the metal conform to that. Now you can't move this any further inboard than the inner pinch weld. So where I have the vice grips clamped on, that dimension won't change. So the B-pillar structure is up against the inside of the pinch weld. So there's no changing that. So you have to kind of manipulate the metal a little bit. Here I'm welding short segments of the inner part of the B-pillar to the pinch welds at the inner rocker panel. So I just do 4 welds here. This is plenty strong enough. It's not going anywhere. I repeat the same process here on the driver's side. This time I'm using a clamp to hold that piece of metal up against the inside or against the rocker panel, and just making sure it's not going to move. I also add welds to the inside as I did on the passenger side, and here I'm welding the forward section of the A pillar. Again, this cannot move. Like if you look in the corner, you'll see that the forward section there is tight up against the inside of the rocker panel. So that dimension doesn't change. You have to change the dimension using a hammer, whatever, to reshape the outer portion there. Make sure it's going to fit tightly up against the outer portion of the rocker panel. So just make sure you keep that in mind. Certain things you just can't move, and you have to adjust as necessary, sort of on the fly, to make all this stuff work the way that it should. Well, at this point I have the A pillars welded in, and I have the B pillars welded in, the back section as I mentioned and shown previously, and also I welded in the headers from the bottom, the header panels. So right now everything is about as rigid as I'm going to get. So I'm going to take the roof back off and the quarters back off, and that's really all I can remove at this point, because everything else is now part of the car. I will still need to weld these holes that I've created here on top. I don't know if I have another one up. I think I have one more up there. So you can see this doesn't fit super nice to that channel, but it does what it's supposed to do. So I'll have to weld those, and then I will clamp this down and weld these in. So it's not moving, it's not going anywhere. I have to finish welding in these holes here. I have to weld this hole up on top, get that sandwiched together, and I need to weld these down here on both sides. It's not moving at this point, it's not going anywhere. Again, weld these here, the ones up on top, and then these. So once I have all those welded, that is the main structure of the car, the skeleton of the car. Up front here, I do not want to weld this section just yet. I'm going to have to pull the firewall back out, so I may have to pull this out of the way slightly just to make it have clearance. And I can pull the frame rails out, which I will need to anyway, to get the firewall out. So I'm not worried about any of this stuff up front right now. I just wanted to get the main back section of the car together, and I think it's looking pretty good. So now it's getting a little more serious. As I'm welding the overlap to the wheelhouse, I'm just making sure that everything is tight, using clamps, and filling in these welds as I go. So this part of the car, I will grind down those welds because, as I mentioned before, it doesn't need to have the excess weight. So I just try to take off what I can. On this rear section here, I weld the top weld and the bottom, and then I just take a hammer and I adjust the metal to fit accordingly. Now, this piece, I feel like it can't really, I mean, you could move it back and forth, but it's in a really relaxed position right here, so that the top section is welded, that inner flange is holding it against the side body of the car, and that's just like the most relaxed position is where it is sitting right now. So I'm comfortable welding it at this point and making it solid. Seeing how far I can get. I'm running out of welding gas. You know, I don't know what it is. When I'm welding, the fumes or whatever, makes me hungry for steak. I want a steak so bad right now. I'll finish up the other side, and then we'll move on to whatever the next step is. Well, first off, let me apologize for the sound of chainsaws in the background. I think my neighbors are cutting down some trees. So, what I have done is I have welded up all that top section, and if you look in that hole right there, I have added 2 holes that I welded from the inside. I think that's why they put that hole there, so you can do that. And actually on this piece there were 2 pilot holes coming up through, so you could use it for screws, I guess, if you wanted to, or I enlarged them and turned them into plug welds. So everything has been welded, this back section, the inner parts that I talked about. One area that I still have to do is weld this location right here, where there is a hole there for that overlap, and I've clamped both of those in place. And I've been looking things over a little more, and I talked about the issue I had with the rain gutter, and I'm going to show you something. And I know that we talk about these things having different shapes, like this could be stamped one day and be this shape, or it could be stamped at one place, and different things. But I pointed out earlier that this driver's side rain gutter didn't want to fit right. And I think part of it is partly with the shape of the roof. There could be some variables there, partly with the shape of the quarter panel. But I'm going to set the drip rail up in place, and I want to show you something. Alright, so this drip rail, as I mentioned previously, it has to fit underneath the roof. So it needs to go on before any of the roof structure. Now, when I put this in place before, I was fighting with the fitment here at the back and this opening. I don't know if you can see it in the camera or not, but this opening down here, because this was wanting to sit way down here like this. So I'm a little confused by that, because right now this fits pretty well and it almost lines up with that hole. I was getting ready to cut this out over here, this little notch, to make room. But I think what I want to do is put this on, not weld it on. I'm going to run some screws into it, and I'm going to use just what's here. I'm not going to try to force anything, and I'm just going to see what I can do with setting the roof on, maybe independent of the quarter panels. That's snug up against that edge. Almost, it lined up dead on this flange. So now, with that in place, if I angle the camera a little more maybe, it fits much closer here, and I can even push it up just a little, and it clears that completely, and it clears this completely. So I'm going to try to do this on both sides. I want to put both pieces in place, and then I want to set the roof on and see what it tells me. You know, sometimes the metal has to tell you a story. So I'm going to do that, and we're going to find out. So here I'm putting the roof back up on top of the car, and it's a little more tricky with the rain gutters in place. You know, when I was test fitting before, I would put the roof on and then slide the rain gutters up underneath. And in this situation, it actually fits quite a bit tighter than I expected it to. I did not have this issue when I did the 69. It didn't seem like it had any kind of conflict with the roof and the rain gutters. So there's probably going to be some adjusting that I'm going to have to make. Now, what is it going to be? Well, it's going to be a little metal manipulation of the gutter, probably some of the roof, but you have to do what you have to do to make this stuff fit. It's not made perfect. Everybody thinks they are, but they're far from perfect, and you have to make adjustments. So you probably noticed it took a little effort to get the roof to drop down into the rain gutters. And that's why I wanted to do this. I need to make sure that everything is going to fit before I commit to welding on the quarters and all that sort of thing. Now in the back here, of course, the quarters aren't on, which I didn't want them on because I wanted to see how the rain gutter interacted with this inner structure. So everything is in place here on the roof, as it should be. And if you'll notice, there's quite a bit of a gap right here. Now this, you can manipulate it, push it around a little, and change the shape somewhat. But this feels like it needs to be further inboard, or aft I should say, and take up some of that slack. Now I don't know that it's necessary, but you can see it looks like that's what it should do based on this curve. So there's really nothing I can do to change the roof structure. I mean, it's sitting down where it's supposed to be. It's down against the rain gutter. So I may have to do some massaging in this area right here and manipulate this to come back into that curve more. Now, everything else, it's lined up even on the inner structure, so that's fine. And when you get up to this area, it's the same thing. You can see it's got flex here because this piece is not curved the way it probably should be. You can push this up, but there's still a gap. I mean, you can see that there's a gap behind that. And so that creates a bit of a problem as well. Now, up here, with everything interacting, you know, the roof is, like I said, the dimensions are, everything's right. I did a measurement from this edge to the opposite edge on both of my original cars. Same measurement as what I have here. I think it's 52 1/4, I believe is what it is. Same way with that crisscross measurement that I talked about earlier. I measured from the inside of this pinch weld to that pinch weld, and it's 61. So I know that everything is square where it should be. But you still run into these problems because this is pushing out slightly. The roof is pushing slightly against the drip rail. Now this is pretty wide. Even if I put this up against the inside here, that's pretty wide. And it does that on both sides. Now, there's probably, again, some stamping, you know, how things don't always fit exactly like we want them to. This one in particular, if you put it up against the inside flush, you can see just how wide that is all the way up. So I'm going to try to do some manipulation and get this a little tighter up in this area. I may end up having to split this right here because once you start pushing on this, it has nowhere to go. Metal has to have a place to go. And so I may put a line right about here somewhere and allow this to push up and this to push up and help this thing get into position better. Because I think there's a lot of fighting going on with the shapes. Same way over here, you have that situation where this gap is. And this is, I mean, you can push on it and get it to go back some, but it's still fighting. So it may take me a little while to get all this trimmed and adjusted, and I'll probably end up doing the bulk of that in the next video because I'm running out of time this week to try to get any more done. But I want to show you some of these things so you have an idea of what it takes to put this stuff together. All right, I think that's as far as I'm going to get this week on this project. I've demonstrated a lot of things: welding, sheet metal fitment, what you have to do to make these things happen. Test fit, test fit, test fit, right? And there's a sequence to this. You can't just start pushing stuff together and hope for the best. So I try to demonstrate all of that for everybody so they can get an idea of what it takes to make this happen. Now, I want to thank my patrons who continue to support me on this channel. They help me continue to make these videos. And I also put videos on Patreon as well. So if you're interested in becoming a patron, there is a link in the description below. And there's also links for Amazon, Yes Welder, various products that I use on these videos. If you want to follow those links and use those, I get a little percentage out of that. So that helps as well. Otherwise, I want to thank you for watching. There's more to come. But that'll be it for this week. So until next time, take care of yourselves. See ya.